Welcome to the Muay Thai Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, James Nicol. First things first, the Fighting Nutrition course is now live. I've collaborated on with Don Heatrick. Head to jamesnicolnutrition.com. Check that out. Also, I have space for new one-to-one clients. So if you're looking for more individualized help with your nutrition, then again, head to jamesnicolnutrition.com and you can read more about it there. Anyway, on to the stuff you're actually interested in. So today's episode is all about plateaus in your progress, specifically in weight loss, what they are and how to deal with them and overcome them, and whether you should even attempt to overcome them. So firstly, let's define what a plateau actually is. In an ideal world, a plateau would be 4 weeks of no change, basically. So let's say you're aiming for weight loss. That's the primary example I will use in this episode. 4 weeks with no weight loss would constitute a plateau in an ideal world. In a perfect world, however, we don't necessarily live in a perfect world. For strict time-bound goals, for example, if you're making weight, then I would be happy to reduce this 4-week criteria to 2 weeks as a acceptable definition of a plateau. But again, it's not ideal. In an ideal world, we'd wait at least 4 weeks. But if you're making weight, you can't necessarily afford to wait 4 weeks before making any adjustments. So in the 2-week case, so 2 weeks of no progress, there is a chance that you're making adjustments prematurely, but it's part and parcel of making weight. You have to weigh in and you have to weigh up the pros and cons of adjusting prematurely or adjusting too late. So let's say if you're targeting 0.5 kilogram loss per week and your weight is stable for 4 weeks before you make any adjustments, then you'll be 2 kilograms behind schedule. So that'd be a pretty big con in my eyes. However, if you're just doing a fat loss phase and you're not dieting to specifically make weight for a competition, then I 100% recommend that you wait 4 weeks. Playing the long game will serve you massively well in the long run. And a mindset point is that you can see these plateaus as time or an opportunity to practice your patience and maintaining your new weight whilst you're building up this sufficient length of time. So 4 weeks, whilst you're waiting for that sufficient time to pass, so you can make a realistic assessment to identify whether it's a legit plateau or if it's just a temporary stall. In this episode, I'll be talking about plateaus in the context of weight loss. Plateaus do occur during attempts at muscle gain, but it's a far less common experience with fighters. And so we'll be covering fat loss and dieting for weight loss plateaus in today's episode. One thing to note is that waiting sufficient time is even more important if you have a menstrual cycle. So there are menstrual cycle related fluctuations in your body water, typically holding on to more water in the week or so prior to your period, and then releasing this water in the week or so after your period begins. This additional body water can easily mask your fat loss, and this can make it even harder to identify an actual plateau. Hence why it's important to wait 4 weeks wherever possible, but even more important in the case of menstrual cycle related water retention. However, if you are a female and you're in fight camp where you may not necessarily have the luxury of waiting 4 weeks, at the very least, stick to the minimum 2-week rule I mentioned before. And in addition to this, do not reduce your calories based on a lack of weight change in the week prior to your period, because we know you're most likely going to hold on to some extra water here. So wait another week, assess the change in your weight before making any adjustments. For everyone, do not make adjustments after just a single week without a change in your weight. People will even see the scale stay similar for a few days and want to decrease their calories. Please do not do this. It is far too soon to have a realistic assessment, and you'll end up running yourself into the ground, just constantly cutting your calories. Really not a great idea, especially for fighters when you're having to perform in training as well. Also, when you're looking at your body weight, I recommend taking a weekly average to smooth out the daily fluctuations. Your weight is going to fluctuate between days and within the day due to changes in your glycogen, your stored carbohydrates, changes in your total body water, and changes in your gut content. So, if you weigh yourself when you wake up and then you weigh yourself before bed, you're going to be a decent bit heavier before bed because you've increased your gut content. You've eaten more food across the day, and therefore you will weigh more. So I recommend weighing yourself on waking before eating or drinking anything. And if you need to use the loo, then do that before weighing yourself. You can weigh yourself every day and take a weekly average from these 7 measurements. Or if you feel a psychological burden from looking at the scale every day, then I recommend just picking 3 days per week to weigh yourself, keep them consistent every week, and that's fine to get a reasonable average. 1 day per week is likely too subject to being thrown off by the daily fluctuations, and that can cause psychological stress in its own right. So I recommend at least 3 days, up to 7 days per week. Some people, if you don't feel a negative psychological impact from weighing yourself every day, just having that as a routine daily habit that you stick to can be easier than weighing yourself some days versus not. So now we've defined what a plateau actually is. Let's dive into why they happen. So why do weight plateaus happen? Remember, we're talking about 4 weeks of no change, not just a few days or a week without a weight change. I want to answer this question with a quote from a book called Flexible Dieting by Alan Aragon. It's highly recommended, and I've adapted the framework that he uses in his book in combination with the approach that I use with my clients to form the basis of what I will speak about in this episode. So the quote goes like this: there are only 2 possible causes for a weight loss plateau. Either 1, there is a lack of adherence to the program, or 2, a new point of equilibrium in energy balance has been reached, a new point of maintenance where the energy intake and output are equal on an ongoing basis. So, the empowering thing about this message is that the possible causes are simple and controllable. It's not due to things like not following the right diet for your body type. It's not due to your insulin levels, food intolerances, not taking some special magic supplement or other bullshit that companies and individuals will try to sell to vulnerable individuals who are confused and frustrated with a lack of progress, despite feeling like they're doing everything right. So the only 2 possible causes for a weight plateau, in simple terms, are either you've not stuck to the plan knowingly or unknowingly, or B, you are sticking to the plan, but the plan, what you are doing by sticking to the plan is consuming essentially your maintenance calories. One thing that's really important is that you don't take a lack of adherence to mean a lack of trying or a lack of effort or a lack of willpower. This is almost never the case, especially with fighters. We all train hard in the gym. My experience is that dieting struggles are very rarely due to laziness. So firstly, let's dive into the first one, the first possible cause of a weight loss plateau, which is a lack of adherence. So the important distinction here is that a lack of adherence can be conscious or unconscious. An example of a conscious lack of adherence could be simply not following the plan and being aware of this, knowing this. It could be that you're not following the plan for a variety of reasons. It could be that you're too hungry. You're doing your best to follow the plan, but you're simply too hungry and you can't stick to it. It could be for social events. You're trying to follow the plan, but maybe you have lots of work meals or meals out, or you just regularly go out to eat for meals that maybe aren't included in your plan. And you know this, you know that you're not following the plan. It could be that you have a rubbish plan and you're just super bored of what you're eating, or it could be diet fatigue. Even if you have the quote unquote best plan in the world, it could simply be that you've dieted for too long or too hard, or you're just not in the right place. And so you are not sticking to the plan and you are aware of this. Another example of a conscious lack of adherence could be having too many untracked or off-plan meals or quote-unquote cheat meals or cheat days. In this scenario, you know that these meals aren't necessarily in line with your plan, but perhaps you feel like the dieting you've done earlier in the week will allow you to still make progress, or you're just so fatigued from the dieting that you've done earlier in the week that you simply can't help yourself. or perhaps simply you just edit them out of your memory. So although you, in the back of your mind, you know that you've been having too many off-plan meals, but you don't want to accept this. It's sort of human nature to do this sort of thing. And so just having these meals, knowing that you're having them, but sort of editing them out of your memory is also a possibility. Now, it's really important to know that this isn't at all to say that indulgence meals can't be included in a plan. They 100% can, and they are in every single one of my one-to-one clients' plans. But if you are not progressing at your desired rate, then these unaccounted for meals are often either the reason or, at the very least, a contributing factor. You can very easily blow a whole week's deficit out of the water with just a meal or two. That's the harsh reality of it. So there are 168 hours in the week, and for 165 of these, you could be sticking to the diet perfectly well. But if those final 3 hours are made up of uncontrolled overeating, this can easily undo your progress despite feeling like you're dieting, which, let's face it, is not the best feeling in the world, for 99% of the time. So 99% of the time, you're exerting the effort required for dieting, and just that final 1% of being too uncontrolled it is stalling your progress. Again, to reiterate, I don't want anyone to take this out of context. I am not saying that your diet needs to be super strict and rigid. In fact, completely the opposite is true. Flexible approaches to dieting have consistently been shown to be better, especially for the sustainability and tolerability of the diet, which ultimately is key in long term results. I use a flexible approach with all of my clients. What I am saying is that you should look to address these meals in some capacity before you reduce your calories and make your diet even harder to follow, and therefore even more miserable, and even less likely to lead to the result that you're hoping for. So that covers conscious lack of adherence. The second type, unconscious lack of adherence, is more common, and this could be a factor in a few ways. One, it could be having incorrect entries in your food database. So this is why I recommend Chronometer or MacroFactor over MyFitnessPal. MyFitnessPal has a lot of user entered data, which can be missing information or just downright incorrect. There's also a load of options for each food item. Let's face it, if you search chicken breast and you can pick between an option that has 150 calories or 250 calories for your serving size, you're going to be much more tempted to pick the lower calorie one, especially if you're dieting. But to be frank, your body doesn't give a shit about what you enter in your tracking app. It only cares about what you actually consume. So you could be tracking everything that you're eating perfectly, but errors in the food database of your tracking app are causing this unconscious lack of adherence. The second potential cause of an unconscious lack of adherence could be simply forgetting to track some foods. It could be quite commonly things like bites and nibbles that you have, maybe when you're cooking, having an extra bite, or someone offers you something at work, maybe you just have a little bit. It could be forgetting to track cooking oils, or perhaps not tracking the full amount that you're consuming. Research has consistently shown that pretty much everybody underestimates their calorie intake, even dietitians, is simply a human trait. This isn't really a problem unless your under tracking is causing a plateau. Just be aware that if you're not losing weight on X number of calories, then there is a good chance that you're actually consuming a little bit above that amount that you are tracking. So I've covered a lack of adherence, and I've broken it down into conscious and unconscious and given some examples of each of those. Let's now talk about what to do about a plateau that is suspected to be caused by a lack of adherence, whether conscious or unconscious. So if you identify that a lack of adherence could be a cause, the solution is to increase your adherence to the plan in some way, and this could be achieved in a variety of ways. It could be improving the accuracy of your tracking. So one tactic you could employ is to track everything rigorously for a week. All cooking oils, weighing everything, every bite or nibble you have, cups of tea with a splash of milk. This can help identify the degree of untracking that was occurring prior. So for example, if this week comes out, let's say 300 calories higher, per day than your previously tracked intake, you know this is more likely close to the actual number you were consuming. Another option is to track all days or all meals if you weren't previously. Perhaps you were just tracking some of the time, or having an untracked day here or there, or untracked meal here or there, which again isn't necessarily a problem unless it is stopping your progress. So tracking all days or meals if you weren't previously, or even beginning to track if you weren't previously. Remember, this is only in scenarios where a plateau has been reached. You can certainly make incredible progress without tracking or only tracking some of the time. However, when you are not making progress, then something needs to change. Another way to improve your lack of adherence to the program is to improve the program to better suit the individual. If there is such a thing as a secret to dieting success, it's individualization, i.e., personalizing the diet to suit the individual's lifestyle, preferences, routines, etc. An individualized diet that works for you is much easier to stick to and will drive much better results than trying to fit yourself into a cookie cutter diet with no consideration of your individual needs. If your current diet has you eating 6 meals per day, for example, but you prefer 3, then change this. If you're eating foods that you don't like, swap them for foods that you do like with a similar macronutrient composition where possible. So improving the program to better suit you as an individual is a great tactic to increase your adherence and increase not only the enjoyability of the diet, but also your likelihood of getting the results that you're aiming for. It sounds very simple, but you would not believe the amount of cookie cutter diets that are out there and how often people look to these to solve their dieting struggles. Now, if you've made all of these changes, so improving your tracking accuracy, tracking all days if you weren't previously, improving your program to better suit you as an individual, and you're still struggling to adhere to the diet despite making these changes, it may be time to accept that dieting is not the best option for you right now. Simply wanting to weigh less alone is not a good reason to diet. Dieting is hard at times, it's a challenge at times, and you need to be ready and willing to face this challenge. Otherwise, it's a recipe for a bad time. It may be that your life circumstances are not conducive to dieting. If you're highly stressed, for example, then adding another stressor in the form of dieting is probably not the best idea and could even negatively impact your health and well-being, achieving the opposite effect to what you're aiming for. If you identify that this may be relevant to you, you could take a break from dieting and or tracking altogether and simply aim to maintain your weight. This would be a good achievement in and of itself, so that's important to point that out. Okay, so let's just reassess where we're at now. So if you've identified that a lack of adherence is your problem, then you've taken the necessary steps to improve adherence. After this, your progress will either resume. If it does, happy days. If it doesn't, then it's time to look at the second possible cause. Also, if at the first step you assess that your adherence to the program has been good and isn't an issue, then we also need to look at the second cause. And let me just remind you of that second cause for a plateau, which is that a new point of equilibrium in energy balance has been reached. Basically, your energy intake and your energy output are equal on an ongoing basis, and that leads to weight maintenance. So your energy out from things like your basal metabolic rate, which is just the energy required to basically keep the lights on, just to keep you alive, and also your daily movement from both exercise and non-exercise is approximately equal to your energy in, which comes from calories consumed via food and drink. Metabolic adaptation is a huge topic in its own right, and it's far too complex to get into in any detail in this episode. But essentially, as you lose weight, not only does your body weigh less and therefore require less energy to just go about your daily life, but also your body attempts to conserve energy to stop you just losing weight forever and starving to death. This can be through things like increased lethargy and less energy in training, and also the downregulation of various metabolic functions. Your body doesn't know that food is never hard to come by in the first world. These adaptations were developed when we didn't have a Tesco or a 7-Eleven on every corner. Anyway, this ultimately is the reason for point 2. The more weight you lose, the more your body aims to reduce your energy out through the mechanisms I just mentioned and increase your energy in through increased hunger and drive to eat. And the result of this is an increasing likelihood of reaching this new maintenance, this new energy balance or equilibrium. So at this point, you have two options. Either you can accept the plateau and try to maintain your weight, again, a success in its own right, which isn't spoken about enough, or you can attempt to break the plateau and continue to lose weight. I recommend that you accept the plateau if your psychological fatigue is high and or your physical fatigue is high and or just the thought simply of reducing your caloric intake or increasing your energy expenditure further just brings upon a sense of dread. These are all signs that it's probably a good idea just to accept the weight plateau and aim to maintain your weight. If you do decide to do this, so accept the weight plateau, aim to maintain your weight, then your next step should be to take a diet break, which would mean no tracking, or to switch to maintenance calories. So continue tracking and just aim to maintain your weight. Again, I sort of touched on this earlier, but a huge mindset point is to see this as a chance to practice maintaining your new weight. As I mentioned already, this is a success in and of itself, as many people struggle to do this. This period of accepting a plateau and aiming to maintain your weight can last weeks, months, or simply forever if you decide that you're happy to maintain this weight forever. Now, the other option, when to attempt to break the plateau. Well, if your physical and or psychological fatigue is either low or tolerable, and you feel like you could stick to either a reduced caloric intake or higher output, or you need to make weight for a fight, and you simply don't have any other option than to break the plateau, otherwise you'll miss weight. So if you decide to attempt to break the plateau, then we need to adjust the program. By the time we've got to this point, just as a refresher, we've discerned that your adherence to the program isn't an issue. We've reached a point of energy balance, and this is the cause of the plateau. And you are ready, willing, and able to attempt to break the plateau and re-establish a calorie deficit. So what this means is that the program needs to change. Your adherence to the program is fine. It's the program itself that needs to be adjusted. So in this scenario, there are three options that we have when it comes to adjusting the program at a very top level. Number one, we can increase your energy out. This is most suitable if you don't feel like you can necessarily stick to a lower caloric intake for whatever reason. You can increase your energy out through any way that you like. And in fact, doing it through a way that you do like is the best option. This could be adding some cardio. It could simply be doing more training sessions of any sport or exercise that you enjoy. You could aim to increase your daily steps. This last one of increasing your daily steps is quite useful as it doesn't tend to add soreness. For example, if you're doing Muay Thai and adding in more sessions of this, or weightlifting, for example, you might be sore from this. But adding your steps isn't going to make you sore. And this can also counteract the reduction in non-exercise activity thermogenesis, basically the reduction of your daily life movement outside of exercise. And this reduction in your non-energy expenditure accounts for some of the reduction in your energy outside of the equation when dieting. So to put that in more easily understandable terms, when you diet, like I mentioned before, your body adapts to reduce your energy out. Some of this may come from lower energy during training. You're able to burn less calories during training, but research has shown that a decent proportion of this comes from just reductions in your daily life movement. Things like, walking, you'll be less likely to walk somewhere, more likely to take a lift or an escalator or whatever, more likely to drive somewhere, less energetic to, go and wash the dishes or do some gardening or just go out for a walk. Ultimately, whatever method you enjoy and can stick to is going to be best. Following on from this, it is worth looking at your daily steps, regardless of which method you choose. Most phones will track these, so you can have a look there. You can see if your daily steps have reduced on average since you started dieting. It's quite a common phenomenon, which often happens subconsciously, but seeing the data can provide concrete evidence of something you may otherwise not have noticed. If you see that, okay, before I started dieting, I was doing like 8 or 10,000 steps a day. Now I'm dieting and that's dropped to like 6,000, for example. That's a concrete example of this metabolic adaptation that your body is trying to conserve the energy. One personal example that brings this to life is this. So my girlfriend and I share a motorbike. She's just started a new job. It's about a 15-20 minute walk away. Last week, I was recovering from illness and I was just training once a day just to ease back into things. And what I did every day last week is I would drop the bike outside of her work on the way back from training, and then I'd walk home so she could basically drive it home when she finished instead of me coming to pick her up because she finishes quite late at night. This week, I'm back to twice daily training, so exercising a lot more. And I've opted to stay awake and pick her up later instead of dropping the bike and walking home every single day. I simply don't have the energy or the willpower or whatever to drop the bike and make that, 15-20 minute walk home. Last week, I had the energy to walk. This week, I definitely don't. And the purpose of this anecdote is to illustrate the point that if you add, for example, 500 calories of exercise to your daily routine, then energy may be reduced somewhere else in your day to constrain or put a limit on your total daily energy expenditure or your energy out. That might mean that what you thought was a 500 calorie increase is maybe just a 400 calorie net increase. The net impact is likely still a positive increase, but it's just something to be aware of. It might not necessarily be as much of an increase as you had anticipated. So those are your options for increasing the energy out. Increase your activity through exercise or non-exercise in whatever way you enjoy most. Number 2 is to decrease your energy in. So option number 2. This is the most common adjustment. I find this best if your energy expenditure is already pretty high, you're already training a lot, so there's not that much room to increase this further. If you're training very hard or very often or both, it's also worth noting something called the constrained energy theory, which is basically the theory that our bodies make adaptive adjustments to high levels of activity, so the sort that you would see in a pro athlete or a pro fighter, in order to put a limit on your total daily energy expenditure within a certain range. So to make this make sense, if you go from sitting on a sofa to training once per day, there will probably be a decent increase in your daily energy expenditure. But if you go from training 2 times per day to 2 times per day plus an additional 30 minutes of cardio in an attempt to increase your energy out, then there's a chance that your body can reduce some aspects of your non-exercise energy expenditure, your calories burned from your daily life movement that is outside of your training, in order to constrain, i.e. put a limit or a restriction on your total daily energy out. If you do decide to go with option 2, decreasing the energy in, then I recommend adjusting by 100 to 200 calories at a time or 10%. If you adjust by more than this, then you risk overshooting and potentially harming your adherence to the program. In terms of where to reduce these calories from, I recommend reducing them from liquids first because these are less satiating than whole foods. So if you're currently consuming things like juices, sports drinks, smoothies, milky or sugary coffees, and any other calorie-containing beverages, then make your calorie reductions from these first before you sacrifice the more satiating, typically more nutrient-dense whole foods. So option 1, increase energy out. Option 2, more common, decrease energy in. And finally, option 3 is to concurrently increase your energy out and decrease your energy in, so at the same time. This is a viable option technically, but it's not one I prefer or use regularly. As I just mentioned, we don't want to overshoot things and be too aggressive. We should make the minimum adjustments needed to achieve our desired rate of progress, and adjusting both of these variables may be too extreme and could pose a threat to your adherence and performance. And we definitely don't want to do that. So I recommend either increasing your energy out or decreasing your energy in. Try these first before you attempt to do both at the same time, because often that can backfire. So to wrap up, you now know how we define a plateau, why plateaus happen during our pursuit of weight loss. I've dived into the first cause, which is a lack of adherence. I've broken this down further into conscious versus unconscious lack of adherence as potential causes. I've spoken about what to do about a plateau suspected to be due to a lack of adherence, and also what to do if you're consistently struggling to adhere to your diet. We've also covered the second possible cause of a plateau, which is reaching your new maintenance or energy balance. I've discussed when to accept the plateau versus break the plateau. If you decide to accept the plateau, I've explained what you should do next. I've also discussed when to break the plateau and the 3 options we have to achieve this. increase energy out, decrease energy in, or a combination of these. I hope you found that useful. If you did, please share it with someone who could benefit. Give the podcast a 5-star rating, all that good stuff that helps us out. And the final thing to say is that I do have some availability to take on new one-to-one nutrition coaching clients. So if you're looking for an individualized, structured, sustainable, and flexible plan for your nutrition that works for you all 52 weeks of the year, then you can get in touch. If you go to my Instagram and click the link in my bio, there's an application form in there. Just fill in a couple of quick details and we'll go from there. That's it for today. I'll catch you in the next one.